At the moment, I'm manager of the London Hearing Voices project at Mind in Camden, which means I get to run a project that works with lots of people around the whole of London that hear voices. We work in prisons, we work with children and young people, we work with people with difficult beliefs. We kind of promote peer support groups where people come together, share stories and really find a way of kind of making sense of their experiences. If you'd have met me a decade ago, you'd have seen someone very different. I wouldn't have been able to speak to you like I am now. I'd have been looking down at the floor, I'd have been really anxious, shivering almost, and I'd tell you that I was schizophrenic and that there was no hope for me. The turning point for me was, there was lots of turning points, but some of the big turning points were meeting people that actually wanted to hear my story. I went to a Hearing Voices group, part of the Hearing Voices network, and met these other people that heard voices that were human beings, you know, real people that were trying to cope with it. And for the first time in ages, I started to feel like a real person again. I started to connect with others. I started to realise that maybe my voices made sense. Maybe it's not an illness. And just hear these alternatives that have been so formative in my life. I think that's what got me from the ill schizophrenic with no future to the person I am today. It's World Hearing Voices Day on the 14th of September, and last year I created this for Intervoice, the International Hearing Voices Network, and it's a series of postcards that are statements from voice hearers across the globe. I mean, one I love in particular is Eleanor's, and that's the voices took my pain, took the place of my pain and gave words to it. But there's ones from guys of different ages, different cultures, and we're really trying to spread these around in social media. I was about 18 or 19 at university, and I was starting to really struggle. There were voices that were speaking to me. I believed I had an alien inside my body, that I was part of a conspiracy. I wasn't even really able to eat because I thought I was being poisoned. I went to my GP because I was self-harming to cope with all this distress, and they put me on antidepressants and everything, but then sent me to see a CBT therapist for anxiety. Of course, I didn't tell them about the voices or the aliens, but it was this psychologist that really noticed that something really wasn't right for me and got me to see a doctor, a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was lovely. He basically, once I told him what was going on for me and once I opened up, he said, it's okay, we know what's wrong with you, just come into hospital. A lot of young people go through this. We'll get you on some medication and we'll get you back out to university, you'll be okay. They were almost like the worst words he could have said to me, I think, because then I spent the rest of that 8-month admission and the next few years just waiting for it to be true, waiting to go back to university and waiting for everything to be okay, but it wasn't. Eventually they diagnosed me with schizophrenia. Later it became schizoaffective disorder. They added borderline personality disorder onto it, bipolar psychosis, then back to schizophrenia, and this whole kind of array of labels kind of followed me around. I think looking back at hospital, it's actually really traumatic, both for me and for my family. I mean, my parents still cry when they talk about hospital because they were made to feel as if it was their fault. There were times they described where I wanted to leave the hospital. I wasn't sectioned, I was allowed to leave, but the staff wouldn't let me, so they barred the doors, and there was almost like a tug of war between me and my parents, and eventually I was released with no medication at all. So there was all these really huge situations. But I think for me, the biggest miss really was that I was a traumatised young person who was ready to ask for help finally. But instead of someone sort of sitting me down and going, okay, so Rachel, what's happened to you? How did you end up in this position? You know, who do you think the voices are? What do you think's going on? Instead of someone trying to make sense of my experiences, I got a label, a diagnosis of schizophrenia and then schizoaffective disorder, and I got given up on, I think. The only cure, the only solution, the only help offered really was medication, and that's really the last thing that I needed at that time. Some of my other passions, I guess, are music. I'm a musician, so I sing, I play guitar, I gig when I have the time. I write songs that are based in my experiences, so music used to be a big coping strategy for me when I was younger, and it used to help me live, really. It was my survival strategy. And now I've learned to deal with my voices. It's now just fun. It's something I enjoy.
Oh, and I wanna fall, yeah, I need to fall for you.
There isn't anything wrong with me. This is probably going to sound weird because I've just been telling you that I hear voices, I've got visions. You know, I'm a poster child for psychosis, but actually I'm just a survivor of some really horrible childhood experiences and trauma, and my voices and my visions are kind of metaphors. They're kind of almost the links to those horrible things that happened to me. They're the way I coped as a child, and to call that an illness is deeply, deeply disrespectful, because it's basically saying there's something wrong with me. You know, just like an abuser said there was something wrong with me when they hurt me. It's the system saying there's something wrong with me. It's not an illness or a symptom, it's a survival strategy. And to call it an illness just left me with no hope and no way forward, really. If I could go back and speak to the psychiatrists that treated me when I was in hospital, I think I'd like to just sit them down, really. I'd like to sit them down and just ask, why is it that they don't look at the evidence? Why is it that they treat people like me with medication primarily? Why is it that they label people like me with schizophrenia? Why don't they look for the reasons, the true reasons that are actually there, rather than some mythical chemical imbalance? What is it about them? What is it about their training? What is it about society that won't let them look at the real me? Why do they have to force me into this schizophrenic box? And why won't they listen?
The sugar makes the